There's a wonderful parable that has gone around the circle for a while. I don't know if it's a true story or not, but it's a story they tell. The man got shipwrecked, ended up on a little island for years, like castaway. He's on this island, and finally someone comes and rescues him. He's in the boat, and they're leaving the island, and he's looking back at this place that's been his home for the last number of years. And the captain could see there were 3 huts there on the island. And so he asked this man, he said, what were the 3 huts for? And he said, well, first one is where I lived, and the second one was my church. Well, what was the third one for? He said, that was my first church until I got mad at it and I left and built a new church. He's all by himself on an island, and he's in a church by himself, and he gets mad at his own church and has to build another one. Maybe you've had your own issues with the church along the way. We've all had, I think. I'm a pastor. The last year at church. We have a wonderful church, but we all have issues with the church. What do you do when you're mad at the church? President of the university back a few years ago, I was at La Sierra. We were at another church. I won't go through all the details, and we were sitting at a meeting. And I was sitting between that president and another pastor from another church, and somehow that pastor was upset at our university. I don't remember what he was upset about, but he began to lean in front of me and began to argue with the president and talk about how the university wasn't what it should have been and his own very conservative agenda. And it was difficult, and I finally said, let's talk about it later. As the president and I walked out onto the parking lot on the way to my car, he just said to me, just out of frustration, if that's the church, they can just have it. They can just have it. I'm not sure I want to be part of a church that has that kind of attitude and those kinds of people. What do you do when you get mad at the church? But I said to him, we can't leave. If you and I leave, then the church becomes those people. We cannot. We want to work together to make the church what it ought to be, a church that will honor God. I was back in Maine doing camp meeting one time years ago, and we had wonderful people there. But I was preaching the first couple nights on grace, and sermons I've preached here, I'm sure, on Flame of Truth, when the reaction wasn't what I usually get. People usually are very warm and encouraging. Oh, we love that picture of God. Thank you for the story of grace. But there were nice remarks, but not typical. So the third night I said, I better preach a good standard sermon on living a godly life and keeping the commandments, and we need to uphold the standards. Oh, that's what they wanted to hear. Long line after the meeting. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. That's what we needed to hear. We need more of that. Do some more of that tomorrow. I had to go up to sign autographs for a book that I had at that time. And as I walked into the bookstore, some man caught me there at the door, and he said, that was very good tonight. That's what we need, more of that. Keep up the standards, uphold the standards of the church. And then he said, tomorrow night deal with jewelry and women wearing pants. Women wearing pants? You want me to preach about that? I got back in the car with my wife, and I said, we're not in our church in California anymore. These were wonderful people. I'm not trying to say anything about that. But this is church with a wide variety of people who have a different point of view, who come from left and right and middle. And sometimes you get mad at the church when people are judgmental. There's too much politics or too many rules. Church is boring. What do you do when church disappoints you and you are bored or bummed out or burned out on the church, as someone said? I just got back from Africa. The church headquarters is a few miles away from this college that I've been helping. And the president told me it had a little incident where the president of our headquarters church, I won't go into any more details than that, somehow he had been voted out as the leader of the church. And as the president, somehow he had acquired a car. And I think probably, they felt like the president had a car, so they needed to help him have transportation. He hadn't put any money into the car. The church had paid the money for the car. It was the church's car for his use. But when he got voted out, he wanted to keep the car. And so they tried to say to him, if you can produce any receipts or cancel checks where you have paid anything for the car, we'll negotiate. He could not produce anything, but he wanted to keep the car. And so he came out to teach at the college, be in the religion department. But here he was, basically hadn't stolen the car from the church. And so finally the college had fired him because he was not being honest. And he refused to leave his job. He said, you can't fire me. He refused to leave his house on campus. Very difficult. And now he was suing the church. What do you do with these stories? We could tell 100 stories. You could tell stories when you've been disappointed with the church. What do you do when you're upset with the church? Well, we want to talk about this a little bit today. Daniel chapter 2 is a passage from the Bible that you're all familiar with. We go through Daniel 2 with the Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And we finally come down to the 10 toes of iron and clay and then the stone, the famous stone. And we have in Daniel chapter 2, verses 35 and 36. It says, and the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor. The wind blew them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. And then we come down to Daniel 2, verse 44. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. The stone. The stone. Well, what does this stone have to do with the church? And God is saying ultimately in this passage, whatever you are going through, you may be poor, but you won't be poor forever. You may have gone through a divorce or gone through some other tragic thing in your life. But someday that will be made up for. You may have been sick. You may be in a country where there is suffering. I just came back from Africa. I've been in other countries in the world where you can hardly stand it to see people suffering. People in Iraq, the church in Iraq, struggling. And the message to people who live in these situations is this is not going to last forever. Yes, you may be under Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, or the 10 toes. But someday a stone is going to come and it's going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. You will not have to go through this forever. That's the good news of Daniel chapter 2. Christ is going to come and set up a kingdom. I've been to the Philippines. I was supposed to go this summer to this island, Leyte, where MacArthur landed. I've been on Corregidor, where he had to stay in the tunnel. They have a whole display now where MacArthur was. And they have a little light and sound show where they feel the ground pounding to understand what it was like when the bombs were pounding on Corregidor 24 hours a day. Finally, they decided they had to get MacArthur off, put him on a little boat to go to a submarine. And before he left, he says, don't you worry, I shall return. Famous story. He came back on Leyte a couple years later, walked onto the water. There's a statue there now on Leyte. MacArthur returned. Jesus says, I will set up my kingdom that'll never be destroyed. So we usually think of this stone as a second coming. But if you look at the Bible, we understand that there's a sense in which Jesus came the first time. Back when he came as a child at Christmas and then died on the cross, that was also maybe the stone. And let me help give you some of the background of this. In Luke chapter 1, verse 31, it says, the angel said to Mary, you are going to give birth to a son. And then in verse 32, he will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And then verse 33, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end. It is almost a word-for-word fulfillment of Daniel chapter 2, where it said the kingdom will be set up, and the stone and his kingdom will never end. And now the angel is saying to Mary, the mother of Jesus, your son is going to be that stone. He may look very like every other baby in the world, but he is going to be the beginning of that stone. And Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, I will build my church. Thou art Peter, but on this rock I will build my church. And so we have this message that Jesus Christ is the stone. Peter himself understood that Christ was the chief cornerstone. And that stone has begun on Christ, on his incarnation, on his life, on his death and his resurrection. That's the beginning of the stone. Yes, the full fulfillment of the stone is at the second coming when it fills the whole earth and the universe. But today, the stone has already begun. And the stone has now 2.3 billion Christians all over the world. The stone's been getting bigger. Every time someone comes to Christ and believes in this picture of God, they become part of the stone. Are you part of the stone today? Well, let's go a little farther. The stone is the church. The stone is the church. If the stone is Christ, and that Christ came to set up the kingdom, then when you accept Christ, you become part of the kingdom. The stone, the mountain, we're doing mountaintop living. The stone and the mountain represent Christ and the church. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom, which means this, is that if you want to be part of the kingdom, you have to be part of the church. People say to me all the time, I love Jesus and I love God. I have trouble with the church. I have trouble with organized religion. Because the church can make you mad. The church can disappoint you. You can be bummed out, burnt out on the church. But here it is saying you cannot give up on the church. Because the church is the stone. Jesus is the stone and the church is the stone. The kingdom is the stone. You cannot choose between Jesus and the church. They come together. You can't have a choice. Yes, the church is not perfect. The church can do some outrageous things. I choose to stay with the church because the church is the stone. The church is the kingdom. You may not agree with everything of the church. Maybe you might call it a lover's quarrel or the loyal opposition, where we're constantly trying to work with the church and the leaders and the pastors to have the church be better. But we're still part of the church. Don't give up on the church. I preached in an earlier Flame of Truth on Romans 16, that the idea that there is a church, Romans 16, where Paul wrote to all of his friends, and he said, greet so-and-so, greet so-and-so. The people that he had spent 25 years with, been in prison with, been shipwrecked with, who brought food to him in prison, the people he had done life with. And I said to you, do you have a Romans 16? I have Romans 16 all over the world. All the churches where I have pastored, California, Oregon, Chicago, now La Sierra, places where I've spoken, places I've done camp meetings and weeks of prayer and evangelism, and just done life with. I email people all over the world every day, part of my Romans 16. You need a church, you need a stone, be part of the kingdom. Remember the joke that someone told about the guys doing the bungee jumping business down in Mexico? They put their platform up, they hooked the bungee rope. First guy jumped, didn't come back for 40 minutes. Finally came dragging up. Some Mexicans were down there watching, and he got up. He was all beat up, and they said, where have you been? And the guy says, what's a piñata? When they saw him bouncing, they thought it was a piñata, and they hit him. It's a joke. It's not a very nice joke. But it's what happens to so many people. Maybe it's happened to you. You've been part of a church. You got excited about Jesus, and you joined the church, and you got baptized, and people were nice. And then you found the humanity of the church, and you got disappointed by the church. But the message of Daniel 2 is the stone someday is going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. And that's the church. It's the kingdom. Don't leave the church. When I was in Chicago, I used to watch Michael Jordan play basketball. And he was the best. Incredible. But I have used as an illustration, if you took all the moments where Michael Jordan did not make the shot, where he missed the shot, or he missed the ball, or kicked the ball out of bounds, or his opponent was able to score against him. If you just took those moments and made a video out of them, you would say, who is Michael Jordan? Get him out of the league. He doesn't deserve to be in the NBA. If you left out all the shots he made and all the rest. And if you just focus on the things where the church makes mistakes, where the church disappoints you, and you never focus on all the moments of worship, on all the schools and all the orphanages and all the hospitals and all the ministries all over the world where we take shiploads of food and medicine all over the world. We are doing those things, even as a local church. Every time someone goes from not being a very nice person to being converted to becoming a godly person, all those moments, if you cut those out, you would say, forget about the church. But you have to hold on to those moments that are precious, that show you what a church is all about. Don't leave the church. Don't give up on the church. Well, what can we learn about the church from this mountain in Daniel 2? Number one, the church is going to be huge. Sometimes we quote the one verse that says, the broad road goes down to hell and thousands that go down that road, but only a few find a straight and narrow gate that goes up to heaven. And maybe by comparison, it's going to be few. But here it says in Daniel chapter 2, verse 36, the mountain fills the whole earth. The church, the kingdom is going to be all over the world. It's all over the world today. 2.3 billion Christians. There are going to be hundreds of millions of people that are going to be in that final church. They're going to go onto the cloud and be with Jesus forever. Abraham said that his descendants were going to be like sands of the sea, the stars of the sky. She started with one, Jesus. Then it became the 3, and then the 12, and then the 70, and then the 500, and then 3,000 were baptized at Pentecost, and then 5,000. And now it's gone all over the world, every country of the world. You can meet somebody as a fellow brother and sister in Jesus Christ, the church. A young pastor said to me the other day, he said, if the church doesn't change, if the church doesn't move with the time, the church is going to die. Well, the church, yes, has to change. I'll agree with that. But the church is not going to die because Daniel 2 says it's going to be the stone and the mountain that'll fill the whole earth. It's going to be all over the universe, millions and billions. Revelation 7 says, the great multitude that no man could number. They can number 200 million then in the next chapter. So it has to be greater than 200 million. No man can number the great multitude. Number 2, the church is inevitable. Sometimes people think maybe all these prophecies about the church are conditional. That what if the church doesn't fulfill its conditions, then maybe the church could die out. We're always one generation away from being a ghost town. But it says, Christ's Object Lessons, page 67, when the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced. What if it never happens? Will the church die? But it says, when? Matthew 24:14, when the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into the whole. When, not if, when. It's inevitable. This mountain is going to do it. Just as sure as there was Babylon and then Medo-Persia and then Greece and then Rome, then we are sure that someday the stone is going to come. There's no doubt about it. The prophecy has been fulfilled absolutely for 2,500 years. The final victory is going to come. And then finally, number 3, it'll all be grace-oriented. You think about what the church is going to be like. It says it's going to be based on Christ. Christ is the stone. It's not based on anything else. It's not based on our money, our power, what we've accomplished, what we've done. The church is Christ. He is the head. He is the body. It is all Christ. He is the stone. I will build my church. Christ will build the church. The only people who will be in that church at the end of time, who will be standing on the mountain of Zion, will be people based on the stone, part of the stone, part of Christ. It'll be Christ alone and never be anything else. No legalism. The church will not just be people who are the good people. We are not just deciding between the good people and the bad people or the right or the left. It'll be only one group, people who are with Christ. When Noah came out of the ark, remember, there was only one altar. To God. Fear God and give glory to Him. Well, we've got to go quickly to the end. Why should you wait for the last days? The stone is the church. The mountain is the church. In the last days, there's going to be a group of people who are going to be the mountaintop people who have come and stayed faithful to the end. Standing around the throne of God and the Mount Zion, that's the church. And the big books say that Daniel in the Bible is a type or a symbol of the last days, the group of people in the last days. He and his 3 friends, they pass through the fire, the big test there in Daniel chapter 3, and they have a death decree. Daniel does not wait until the end of his life to become a mountaintop person. He started in Daniel 1, where he passed the test on the food. Then Daniel 2, they went in and gave the interpretation for the dream. Daniel 3, the 3 friends. Daniel 4, Daniel 5, he goes in and speaks before the handwriting on the wall. Daniel 6, he is there faithful to God with the lion's den. Daniel didn't wait until the final end to become a mountaintop person. He was righteous. He was a mountaintop person from the very beginning. And so we would like to say Daniel was a mountaintop person when he was 87. Because he started out as a mountaintop person when he was 17. People think you have 2 choices. You can have one choice where you are serious with God all your life, and you go to church, and you give Bible studies, and you keep the Sabbath, and you are a godly, righteous, committed person all your life, and you're part of the final church. Or you could try to go the semi-serious way where you're not quite so serious. You believe in God, but not really active in church, not really a mountaintop person, and then you wait until the end and try to get serious at the very end and become a mountaintop person. And the message of Daniel say, why would you cheat yourself? Why not live at the very best? Live a mountaintop life from the beginning. Daniel 1, Daniel 2, Daniel 3. Live a full Daniel life that will stand out for God. And then finally, would you like to know what a mountaintop life person is like? Daniel is a standout person. Daniel 1, they refuse to eat of the king's food, and they're 10 times smarter than everyone else. Daniel 2, they are the ones who can walk into the king and say, I know the interpretation of your dream, and I can tell this. All the way through, Daniel is a careful person who is living a careful life. I've read a book called The Corporate Athlete. He talks about living and eating a certain way. Why? Not because you want to be healthy, but because you want to be healthy in order to be the best. When you walk into the room at 3 o'clock, and here's a business meeting, and everyone else is tired, and the day is about over, you walk in and you know the most. You're on top of the game. You are the best because you have been eating and living and sleeping at the very best. The reason to live a mountaintop life so that you will be a mountaintop person all the time. You're the best. Daniel was 10 times smarter than everyone else. And so that's why we are Christians. And this book says that I've been reading, it says your needs need to become your wants. We all know we need to eat righteous, need to eat carefully, live to and get enough sleep and exercise and all the rest. But your needs need to become your wants. Do you want to be a mountaintop person, a corporate athlete at your very best? Number 2, you want to be in a small group. When Daniel got in trouble, the decree went out to kill everybody. Daniel went to his small group and they prayed, and he was there. And so you don't wait until the end of the world to become part of a small group and be part of a religious group of people. Daniel was already part of a small group when the crisis came. When Daniel 3 came, he was already part of a group of people like that. Number 3, Daniel had the spirit of the holy gods in him. It's a great, great story. Daniel walks in when the king sees a handwriting on the wall. We've talked about it here before. And all of a sudden, they cannot understand it. They call for Daniel, come in. And he knows the story. He can read the handwriting on the wall. He has the spirit of the holy gods in him. Mountaintop people, the world, the pagan world knows these are the best. They have the Spirit of God in them. They are the most honest. They will help you make money. They will be there for you. They will never let you down. They will always, the word is good. They are the most attractive, the most honest, the most transparent, the most authentic, because the Spirit of the holy gods are in them. That's mountaintop living when you do it your whole life. There's the Sabbath, I think, Daniel 6. Daniel 6, he refuses to change his way of worship. He prays, he opens the window and he prays 3 times a day to God. He refuses to change. We think mountaintop people are the people who will say, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change what the Bible says about how to worship. If the Bible says to worship on that Sabbath, that's what I will do. They do it just like that. And then finally, mountaintop people stay with the people of God. Daniel in Daniel 9, at the end of his life, he is afraid that God is going to extend the time when Daniel's people, the Jews, are going to be stuck in Babylon, and not get to go back to Israel. And he begs God, let me go with him. God, your temple is being desecrated. We are the people of your name. Let us go. Daniel is successful in a pagan world. He doesn't have to go back to Jerusalem to be on top. But he is still part of the people of God. He is a Jew. He is part of Israel. And he still identifies with his people. And so I want to say Daniel has the best of all 3. He prays in the window. He has a private walk with God. That's part of being a mountaintop person. He's in a small group. When the time comes, he's part of a group. And number 3, he's part of a movement of people. You need all 3. To be a mountaintop person, you're part of the church. Yes, you have a devotional life where you're all by yourself. You open the windows and you pray. Yes, you're part of a small group. But you still need to be part of the larger church of the world, the stone, the kingdom. Don't leave the church. Don't get mad at the church and leave. Stay with the church. And so I just want to give you one last illustration of how the final judgment is going to be, the group of people. I won't tell you the long, long story. It's a story about Eric B. Hare. Was a missionary in Burma. We were next door in Thailand. He was in Burma years and years ago in World War II. And so the story goes that their day came when they were going to be moved out of Rangoon and have to go away to the prison camp. To make a long story short, he had to walk away with nothing. All kinds of rich people came wanting to give their money and their furniture and their belongings to the church. Too late. Why didn't you give it to us when it could have done some good? You could build a hospital. Too late. That'll be what happens in the last days, when people too late come and want to join, want to be a part of it. Came down to the end, they put the people in two camps. And it was interesting, he said, the people sort of sorted into two camps on their own. There were people over here who were the church people, the missionary people. Then there were the people who were fighting. And he began to play his trumpet. They began to sing hymns. And some people couldn't, no, we don't want any music like that. And they went to the other group. No one said, you're here, you're there. People themselves chose to be with this group and then that group. And then the final part of the story. There came a time when the buses came to take them. They'd been walking first. At first, the first two buses came, and the missionary people, the Christians, were going to get on the bus. But these other people who were fussing and secular and mad and arguing and drinking all the time, they said, no, these are our buses. And they got on, they crammed on the buses, and they took off while all the church people were standing behind. A few minutes later, some nice buses came, beautiful cushioned seats, very comfortable buses, and the church people got on those buses. And after a few minutes, they drove and they passed by. Here were the other buses, had broken down, all beat up. The people who wanted to be first, their buses were broken down. The people who were the church people went on the buses and drove right by. And he said, that's the way it's going to be at the end. God does not choose who is in, who is out. People will have chosen all along. What kind of people do you want to be with? You want to be with God people, Him people, Jesus people, servant people, giving people, or do you want to be with the rest of the world? You choose now. You don't wait till the last minute to choose. Are you on the left or the right, the sheep and the goats? Be part of the church, part of the stone and the mountain. God bless you. Amen.